He had built a life on a single reliable truth. Everyone, given the right pressure, said yes. Men with guns said yes. Judges in high collars said yes. The woman his family had chosen for him had said yes before he finished the question. Then a waitress in a dying diner looked him square in the face and told him no again, the week after. And by the time Lazzaro Belandi understood what that small hard word was doing to him, he had already set fire to the only future his family had spent 20 years building. But that came later. On the night it started, Lazzaro was standing at the head of a private table, listening to a man he despised toast to their shared bloodline as if the words meant anything at all. The supper club above the water was built to look effortless and cost a fortune to stay that way. Black glass, low amber light. Waiters moved along the walls like held breath, pouring wine no one would remember drinking. Everything in the room had been arranged, the way everything in Lazzaro's life had been arranged, so that nothing unexpected could ever reach him. Desmond Rourke rose at the far end, glass lifted, and smiled the smile of a man counting a room he already owned. He had flown down from the north with 3 lawyers and a daughter, which told Lazzaro everything about how the older man saw this arrangement. Not a wedding, a transfer of assets. To the joining of 2 careful families, Desmond said. To quiet water and long memory, the table murmured its approval. Lazzaro lifted his own glass a precise inch and set it down again, without drinking. Beside him, Ottavia Rourke watched the performance with the flat patience of a woman who had grown up inside rooms exactly like this one. She was elegant in the deliberate way of a knife laid out on velvet, and she wore the ring Lazzaro had chosen from a jeweler's tray, the way she might have worn a security badge. "You are not eating," she observed, not looking at him. "I ate before," Lazzaro said. "You are not talking either. My father notices these things and remembers them for months. Then, give him something to remember. Tell him the ports transfer cleanly in the spring." Ottavia turned the stem of her glass a quarter turn. "We could at least pretend to like each other," she said. "People do it every day. It costs almost nothing." "It costs the truth," Lazzaro said. "I would rather keep that." She almost smiled at that. Almost. It was the closest thing to warmth either of them had managed in 4 months of dinners, and they let it die. Where it fell, warmth was not the point. The point was the map. Rourke money, moving south through Belandi water. 2 territories that had bled each other for a generation, stitched shut with a marriage license. Lazzaro had done most of the sums himself, alone, in a study that smelled of gun oil and old paper. He should have felt something. A man was signing away the rest of his life at this table. He felt only the familiar low hum of a plan running on schedule, and under it, quiet and stubborn as a stone in a shoe, the thing he could not stop thinking about: a diner, a cracked vinyl booth, a woman with flour on her forearm and tired kindness in her eyes, sliding a plate of eggs in front of him at 1:30 in the morning, and when he had left far too much money folded under the salt shaker, following him out into the cold to give it back. "I do not take that," she had said. "Not from you. Not from anybody. It is a tip," he had told her, genuinely puzzled. "It is not a tip," she had said. "It is a hook. I have seen what happens to people who take hooks from men who dress like you. Have a good night." And she had gone back inside, and the door had chimed, and Lazzaro Belandi, who had not been refused anything of consequence since he was 19 years old, had stood on a broken sidewalk in the flats holding his own money and feeling, absurdly, like he had been let off easy. That had been 3 weeks ago. He had gone back twice since. She had said no, both times, to the money, to the ride home, to the offer of a better job in a cleaner place. She said it plainly, without fear and without flirtation, as if his name meant nothing, as if the whole architecture of dread he had spent a lifetime constructing simply did not reach her corner booth. He did not have a word for what that did to him. He only knew he could not leave it alone. Ottavia was watching him now, with the first flicker of real curiosity he had ever seen on her face. "Where do you go?" she asked quietly. When you go wherever it is, you just went. Lazaro stood buttoning his jacket. Nowhere that concerns the ports, he said. Her father called his name, jovial and hard. Lazaro answered with the right words, the smooth ones, and made his excuses, and felt every eye at the table file, the early exit away for later. Out in the corridor, the air was cooler and cleaner. Eva was already off the wall and moving, car keys in one broad hand, reading his employer the way only a man who had driven for him 11 years could. Home? Boss? Lazaro looked at his own reflection in the black glass, a man in a perfect suit who had everything and had just walked out on all of it to chase a word. No, he said, Halsey Street. The diner on the corner, the Starling. Ivo did not ask why. That was one of the reasons Lazaro kept him. But something moved behind the driver's eyes, some small hesitation, and Lazaro would remember it much later when he understood what Ivo had already begun to know. The city changed as they drove, the way it always did, and Lazaro watched it change with his forehead nearly against the cold window. The glass towers of the waterfront fell away first, their lit crowns sinking behind him. Then the good streets with their doormen and their clipped trees. Then the long gray stretch of nothing, the overpasses and the shuttered lots, and finally the flats where the buildings crouched low and close, and every third storefront wore a sheet of plywood like a bandage over a wound. Rain had come and gone, and come again, and the streets held it in oily sheets that threw back the red of the few working signs. He had grown up not far from here. That was a fact. He kept in a locked drawer and rarely opened. His father had moved them up and out before Lazaro was old enough to keep the accent, and everything since had been a careful campaign to put distance between the boy he had been and the man who now rode through these streets behind bulletproof glass. He did not like coming back. The flats reminded him that comfort was a thing that could be taken away, and Lazaro had organized his entire life around never being surprised by loss again. So he could not explain even to himself why he kept telling Ivo to drive here. She is just a woman who serves eggs, he thought, watching a man pull a steel shutter down over a laundromat. There are 10,000 women in this city who would take my money and thank me for it and count themselves lucky. That was the trouble. That was exactly the trouble. He had spent his life among people who wanted things from him, who arranged their faces the moment he entered a room, who weighed every word against what he might give or take. And here was one small stubborn person who wanted nothing at all, who looked at him and saw not a Belandi, not a name, not a threat, but simply a tired customer out too late, and told him the truth to his face because she had decided the truth was cheaper than the trouble he represented. He should have found it insulting. Instead, he found himself rehearsing what he might say to make her change her mind, and hating himself a little for the rehearsal. Ivo, he said, when we bought the tariff routes through this district. Who collects here? Now, in the mirror, Ivo's eyes went carefully blank. That is Aurelio's side of the house, boss. The street work down here. You gave it to him years ago, so you would not have to think about it. Ivo said nothing. The silence had a shape to it, and the shape was a warning. But Lazaro was not listening, because they had turned onto Halsey Street, and something was wrong. The Starling should have been lit. It was the only all-night place for 6 blocks, a warm yellow box on a dark corner, and on every other night Lazaro had come here. The windows had glowed and the sign had buzzed, and you could see the shapes of the late people bent over their coffee. Tonight, the sign was dark, the windows were dark, and angled across the curb, in front of it, engine running, parking lights, burning a low, sullen red, sat a black car that did not belong to anyone who ate at a place like this. Ivo slowed without being told. His hand had already drifted off the wheel and toward his coat. "Boss," he said quietly, "that is not one of ours." "Stop here," Lazaro said. "Kill the lights." 2 men stood at the diner door. Even at this distance, even in the dark, Lazaro knew the type from the way they held their shoulders loose and bored and certain, the posture of men who had never once in their lives been the ones afraid. One of them was doing something to the lock. The other was watching the empty street with the patience of a person who had been told he had all the time he needed. And in the narrow gap of the prop side door, for just a moment, a slice of pale light fell across the wet pavement, and then was gone, as if someone inside had opened a door they should not have opened, seen what was on the sidewalk, and pulled it shut again very fast. Lazzaro's hand was already on the latch. "Stay with the car," he said. "Keep it running." Ivo caught his sleeve, which Ivo had not done in 11 years. "Boss, whatever this is, it is Aurelio's street and Aurelio's problem, and you are not supposed to be within a mile of it tonight. If those are workmen, then you standing here is a war before the ink is dry." "I know exactly whose men they are," Lazzaro said, and that was the thing that had gone cold and strange in his chest, because he did know. He had known the second he saw them. He pulled his arm free, gently, the way you free yourself from someone you intend to keep alive. 2 minutes. He crossed the street without hurrying. Hurrying frightened people, and frightened people made noise. He came up the sidewalk out of the dark, and he was almost on them before the watcher turned. And by then, Lazzaro had let his coat fall open enough that the man could see the shape of what he was. "Evening," Lazzaro said pleasantly. "This is a closed business. You are trespassing on it." The watcher had a wide, flat face and eyes that took a half-second too long to do their arithmetic. "Walk on, Grandpa," he said. "Family matter. Whose family? That is not your concern." "Everything on this street is my concern," Lazzaro said, still soft. "My name is on the water your trucks float on, and the road your car is parked across. I am going to say this once. Get in your car. Drive north. Tell the man who sent you that Halsey Street is spoken for." The one at the lock straightened. His hand went to his waist, and Lazzaro watched it go, with the detached interest of a man reading a menu he had already memorized. He did not reach for his own weapon. He let the two of them look at his face, and find in it the total absence of fear, which cannot be faked and cannot be mistaken, and which frightens dangerous men more than any drawn gun, because it means the person in front of them knows something they do not. The watcher's certainty cracked. "Just a hair, just enough. We were never here," he said, and jerked his chin at his partner, and the two of them folded themselves into the black car, trying not to look like men leaving in a hurry. The car pulled off the curb, tires hissing on the wet street, and took the corner, and was gone. Lazzaro stood alone in the sudden quiet, the rain starting up again, fine as pins, and turned to the dark diner. The side door opened before he reached it. She stood in the gap with a length of steel pipe held low along her leg, where a hopeful person might not notice it, and her knuckles white around it. Corley. Her dark hair had come loose from its knot and stuck to her cheek. She was breathing hard, and there was a high, bright terror in her eyes that she was fighting with everything she had, and losing, and refusing all the same to look away from him. "You," she said. "Me," he agreed. For a moment neither of them moved. Behind her, the diner was black and cold, the chairs already up on the tables, and something about that stopped him, some detail he could not yet name, because a place that closed in a hurry and killed its own lights did not look like a place that had closed for the night. It looked like a place hiding. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," she said. And then, because she was who she was, she lifted her chin and said the word. He had crossed the whole city to hear her not say, "Whatever this is. Whatever you think you just did for me. The answer is still no. I do not want your help. And I do not want your name near this door, and I want you to get back in your beautiful car and forget the way here." He should have been angry. He was not. He was looking past her shoulder, into the dark, where a second smaller shape had appeared at the top of the stairs behind the counter, a child's shape, a boy of perhaps 9 with sleep in his hair and fear in his stance. whispering a name into the dark that was not Corley's name but sounded like it might be hers to answer for. Corley saw where Lazaro's eyes had gone. All the fight went out of her face, and something far worse came into it. "Please," she said, very low, and it was not a word she was built to say. He could hear that. "Please, not that. Do not look at that." And Lazaro Belandi, who had come here, chasing the pleasure of being told no by a woman who wanted nothing from him, understood in one slow, terrible drop that she wanted something very badly after all, and had been holding the whole weight of it alone, in the dark, with a steel pipe and a locked door, for longer than anyone should. "Do not look at that," she said again, and put herself square between him and the stairs, a woman with empty hands now trying to hide a whole child behind her body. It was the bravest and most useless thing Lazaro had seen in years. Then from the dark at the top of the stairs, the boy made a sound. It was not a word. It was a thin, whistling, effortful thing, the noise of a small chest working far too hard for far too little air, and Lazaro knew it the instant he heard it, because that same sound had come out of his own body once, long ago, in a cold room not so different from this one, in the years before his father had money enough for doctors. Corley was already gone up the stairs, 2 at a time, the pipe forgotten and ringing on the floor where she let it fall. Lazaro went after her. She did not tell him not to. That was how he understood how frightened she was. The room above the diner was one room, a mattress on the floor under the slope of the roof, made up with military neatness, a crate for a table, a single space heater unplugged, its cord coiled and tied, saved for some worse night than this one. And a boy perhaps 9 years old sitting bolt upright on the mattress, with his shoulders climbing toward his ears, and his mouth open, and his whole thin frame bent to the single task of pulling the next breath into a body that did not want to give it. "Bram," Corley said, low and even, dropping to her knees in front of him. "I am here. I have got you. Slow, with me." She had a small plastic inhaler in her fist. She shook it, pressed it, and held it to his mouth. She shook it again, harder, her knuckles white, and Lazaro saw her face do a thing he had not seen it do before, not on the sidewalk with his money, not at the door with the pipe. It came apart, just for a second. Then she nailed it back together for the boy's sake and turned him gently by the shoulders toward the tiny bathroom. "Steam," she said. "Come on, we know this. We have done this 100 times. Lazaro moved before he decided to. He had the hot tap running full in the cramped bathroom by the time she got the boy through the door, the little space already thickening white, and he stepped back out into the room to give them the space, and stood there in his $1,000 coat with his hands hanging at his sides, and for the first time in more years than he could name. Lazaro Belandi could not buy the thing that was needed. He picked the inhaler up off the mattress and read the date, and understood it had been empty for days. That the steam and the low, even voice were not a first resort, but a practiced last one, a drill this pair had run before, because the proper thing was out of reach. A man who could sign for a fleet of trucks with a nod stood in a freezing room and could not make one small chest work, and the smallness of what would have fixed it, a pharmacy, a few dollars, and a name on a form she could not afford to sign, sat in him like a swallowed stone. Through the gap in the door, he could see her in the mist, curled around the boy, her cheek against his hair, breathing slow and loud and deliberate, so the child had a rhythm to borrow. She was pouring her own calm into him by main strength. It was the most competent thing Lazaro had ever watched a person do, and she was doing it with hot water and a half-remembered song, because the world had left her nothing else to do it with. "My doctor is 20 minutes out," he said through the door. "Quiet man, no hospital, no paperwork, no names." The answer came back fast and flat and final. The same word she had given him on the sidewalk, and, at the door, the word he had crossed the whole city to keep hearing. No. The steam did what the empty inhaler could not. Slowly, breath by ragged breath, the boy's shoulders came down out of his ears, and the terrible whistling gentled into something merely rough. And then, He was only a tired child slumped against his sister in a fog of hot mist, and Coralie was murmuring the ends of a song she had clearly sung 1,000 times to this exact end. Lazaro sat on the crate because there was nowhere else, and he waited, and he looked, because looking was the one thing left to him. He saw the neatness of a room, run by someone holding a line against the flood. He saw a shelf of schoolbooks, squared to the edge. He saw a paper calendar, with shifts marked in careful pen, and, in the corner of each week, a small circled number that he understood after a moment was not a bill. He saw 2 plates and 2 cups. He saw, taped inside the door where a child would see it every day and a stranger might not, a photograph of a man and a woman and a much smaller Bram at a beach, the grown pair gone in the particular way that leaves a 19-year-old girl standing where 2 parents used to be. He had walked past 1,000 rooms like this one on his way up and taught himself not to see them, because seeing them was inconvenient to a man with somewhere better to be. He made himself see this one, the saved heater. The countdown circled small in the corner of every week, the single bulb, a whole life run on the wager that if you stayed small enough and quiet enough and asked for nothing at all, the machine might roll past without noticing you were there. He had helped build that machine. He had eaten good dinners on the strength of it. "You want to know why," she said, when the boy had finally sagged into real sleep, and she had laid him down and pulled the neat blanket to his chin. "You have been chewing on it for 3 weeks. Why does she keep saying no? Rich man, good suit, hands out. Why?" "I assumed pride," Lazaro said. Her laugh was tired and had no cruelty in it, which was somehow worse. "Pride is for people with something to spare," she said. She sat back against the wall, her injured watchfulness finally too worn to hold its shape. "Our parents died the winter I turned 19. Bram was 6. If I let anyone with a clipboard decide what happened next, they would have put him somewhere and put me somewhere else, and we would have grown up strangers, so I did not let anyone decide. No clipboards, no papers, no doctors who ask who signs for him. I work the doubles here and I keep us small and quiet and off every list there is, because the day we land on a list is the day I lose him." Lazaro was very still. "And the men tonight," he said. "The block is being cleared," she said. "Every lease bought out or squeezed out. The Starling is the last one standing because old Petros will not sign, and I will not let him, because when this corner goes, we go with it. So every week I hand an envelope to men who look exactly like the men you sent running, to buy 1 more week of being left alone. That is where the tips go. That is why the heater stays unplugged. They come on Fridays," she said. 2 of them, sometimes 3. They are almost courteous about it, which is the part that turns my stomach, the way they say good evening and take the envelope, and remind me kindly that Petros is old, and the winters are hard, and accidents do happen to buildings that fall behind. I have made myself learn all their names. I say them back so they know that I know. It is the only weapon I have, and it is not much of one." "Bought out by whom?" Lazaro said, though the cold thing turning over in his chest already knew. She looked at him then, and there was no fear left in it, only a flat and terrible clarity. "You really do not know," she said. "That is almost funny. It is Rourke money, Belandi. It has been Rourke money the whole time. Northern paper, clearing this ground for whatever comes next. I knew your name the first night you walked in. I know exactly what family you are about to marry into. That is why I said no. Not because you frighten me. Because your wedding is the thing that is killing my street." The room was silent except for the boy's soft, mended breathing and the drip of the cooling tap. Lazaro sat on the crate with his elbows on his knees and understood, all at once and far too late, that the machine he had spent 4 months oiling had teeth, and that he had been listening to it grind this woman down every single time he came here to enjoy the novelty of being told no. And under that, colder still, a second understanding, he had never once authorized a clearing in the flats. He had given the street to Aurelio years ago, so he would not have to think about it. Which meant someone in his own house had been moving Rourke's money through his own ground, and had been careful, for 4 long months, that it never reached his desk. Lazaro stood, and Coralie tensed, expecting the offer again. The money, the strings, the hook. He did not offer any of it. He took out his phone and turned his back to the sleeping boy and spoke 4 low sentences to someone. And then he put the phone away and looked at her. "I did not call a hospital," he said. "I called a man named Corso. He was a battlefield surgeon before he was mine, and he has never filed a piece of paper in his life. He is going to come up those stairs with a bag. He is going to leave your brother breathing easy, and leave a month of medicine on that crate, and he is going to forget this address on the way down. There is no list, Coralie. There is no clipboard. Nothing about tonight touches Bram. You have my word. And my word is the only thing I have never once broken." She stared at him. "You do not get to fix this," she said. But the flatness had gone out of it, and something underneath was shaking. "I did not ask you to fix this." "I know," he said. "That is precisely why I am doing it. Every person I have ever met wanted something from me. You are the first one who wanted nothing, who told me the truth to my face because it was cheaper than pretending. I have spent 3 weeks trying to understand what that was. I understand it now. It is the only clean thing I have stood near in 20 years, and I am not going to let my own name be the thing that snuffs it out." Dr. Corso came as promised, a soft, heavy man who moved through the cold little room like a priest, listened to the boy's chest, woke him gently, worked, and left him sleeping easier than he had in months. He set a row of small boxes on the crate, squared them without being asked, caught the neatness of the room and matched it. And on his way out, he paused at the door and looked at the taped photograph of the beach for a moment longer than a stranger would. And then he was gone down the stairs and the address was gone with him. Once while Corso worked, the boy surfaced from the medicine far enough to fix Lazaro with the frank, unguarded stare that only children and dying men can manage. "Are you the reason those men left?" Bram asked, his voice a thread. Coralie moved to answer for him. "Lazaro got there first." "Yes," he said, because a child that brave was owed a straight answer. "They are not coming back." Bram weighed this with enormous seriousness. "Good," he said. And then, because he was 9 and not a soldier after all, he added, "Cora cries when she thinks I am asleep. You should not let her," and slipped back under before anyone could make him a promise. Across the little room, Coralie pressed the back of her hand hard to her mouth, and Lazaro looked at the squared boxes of medicine so that she would not have to be looked at. Coralie sat on the floor beside her brother with her back to the wall and cried. Finally, without sound, the way people cry who have taught themselves that crying is a thing you do quietly, so as not to wake the child. Lazaro did not touch her. He understood that touching her would turn it into a debt, and that a debt was the one thing she could not survive from him. So he simply sat on the crate and let her have it, and kept watch on the door, the way she had kept watch on it for 3 years, and for the length of that quiet, he was not a boss of anything. He was only a man in a cold room, guarding a door, which was the most honest work his hands had done in a very long time. When it passed, she wiped her face with the heel of her hand and said roughly, "Why? Not the money. Why any of it? Because for 4 months, I have been signing my life over to people who were strangling this street for sport," Lazaro said, "and I thought the worst thing about the arrangement was that it bored me." He looked at the boy. That was when he was still boring. It is not boring anymore. He took out the phone again. He did not call Atavia, and he did not call her father, because you did not fire the first shot of a war by warning the enemy. He called Ivo, and he said, "Come up and bring the ledgers Aurelio keeps for the flats, all of them, the real ones, tonight, and do not let Aurelio know you have them." Then he ended the call and stood in the middle of the small, ordered room, and Coralie watched the last of the tired customer. She had decided he was fall away, and something far more dangerous take its place. "You are going to do something," she said. "I know that look. I have handed envelopes to men wearing that look." "Not that look," he said. He crouched so that he was level with her, careful to keep the space between them clean of any weight. "Here is the truth. Since you are the only person I say true things to, I was going to marry into the family that owns the boot on your neck, and I was going to do it in the spring, and it was going to make me richer and safer than I already am. As of tonight, that wedding is a corpse. It does not know it yet. When it finds out, this becomes the most dangerous city in the country for a little while for me and for anyone standing near me." "Then do not stand near us," she said instantly, fiercely, glancing at the boy. "I intend to do the opposite," Lazaro said. "I am going to end the people, clearing this street, and I am going to find out which man in my own house sold it to them, and until that is finished, you and your brother are the two most protected people I have ever guarded. You can hate every minute of it. You can say no to all of it. You have earned the right to say no to me more than anyone alive. But you cannot make me walk back down those stairs and pretend I did not see this room." "I have pretended not to see a great many rooms," he said, more to himself than to her. "It is the first thing they teach you. You learn to look at a street and see a column of figures. You learn that the people inside the figures are weather, not persons. And that weather is nobody's fault. I was very good at it. I meant to be good at it for the rest of my life." He was quiet a moment. "I seem to have lost the knack tonight, and I find I do not want it back." For a long moment she said nothing. The boy breathed, easy and even, in the mended dark. Somewhere below, a car door shut, Evo's tread on the stair. Coralie looked at the man crouched an arm's length away, who had asked her for nothing, who had not once tried to buy the moment or cross it, and she did the thing that would frighten her most in the retelling. She did not say no. She said, "His name is Bram. If your world so much as breathes on him, I will be worse to you than anyone you have ever crossed." And then, quieter, looking at the medicine lined up on the crate. "Thank you. I hate that I mean it. But thank you." Lazaro Belandi had been thanked by senators and killers and men begging for their lives. None of it had ever done what those 3 grudging words did to him over a dying diner. At the very hour he chose to set fire to everything he owned, he had built his whole life so that nothing could ever surprise him again. He had married that principle harder than he would ever have married any Rourke. Every guard, every ledger, every careful arrangement, all of it mortar poured around a single promise a shivering boy had made in a cold room, that he would never again be the one who could not breathe, never again be the one whose family had no money for the doctor. And here was the joke of it, delivered 20 years late. The safest arrangement of his entire life, the northern marriage, the quiet water and the long memory, had turned out to be built on the bent backs of a girl and a boy in a freezing room, exactly like the one he had crawled out of. He could keep the safety, or he could keep what he had stumbled into in that cold room. He was not permitted both. It was, he decided, the easiest hard decision he had ever been handed. He stood and he went to meet Evo on the stairs, and he let it burn. Evo came up the narrow stairs sideways, the way big men climb. Narrow stairs, a canvas satchel held to his chest, like a thing that might go off. He took in the whole room in a single pass. The sleeping boy, the neat boxes of medicine, the woman on the floor, his employer, crouched in a slum with his coat still on, and to his lasting credit, his face did not move at all. "Everything Aurelio keeps for this district," he said, and set the satchel down on the crate. "The book he shows, and the book he does not. I lifted the second one out of the floor, safe in his office, while he was at the club asking everyone where you had gone." Lazaro opened the second book, under the single bulb, and read it the way he read everything, quickly, coldly, all the way to the bottom. It was worse than he had let himself expect. and he had expected a great deal. For 4 months Aurelio had been running Rourke money through the flats, under Lazaro's own name, buying leases, breaking the ones he could not buy, clearing the ground block by block for a northern developer that was Desmond Rourke, wearing a paper hat. That was the small treachery. The large one was 3 pages further in, written in Aurelio's own careful hand, because a man who has betrayed one master learns to keep receipts against the next. The marriage was never an alliance. It was a swallowing. Once the license was signed and the ports changed hands, Rourke meant to fold the whole Belandi operation into his own and leave Lazaro a figurehead in a nice suit, and the man who had agreed to hold the doors open from the inside, the man who would be rewarded with what remained, was Aurelio, his father's oldest friend, the man who had taught him to load his first weapon and had wept, or seemed to, at his father's grave. There were figures beside the plan, and the figures were the part that turned Lazaro's stomach in a way the treachery alone had not a price for each block cleared. A bonus for each holdout persuaded to leave by whatever means the season allowed. A line near the bottom marked for contingencies, which he understood after a moment was the budget set aside for accidents. Somewhere in that tidy column, unnamed and uncounted, was a diner with a cracked vinyl booth and a boy asleep above it, entered as a cost. Lazaro closed the book. His hands were perfectly steady. That was the thing that would have frightened anyone who knew him. He had loved the old man. That was the inconvenient fact sitting under the steadiness. Not the way you love a boss or an ally, but the way a fatherless boy loves the man who fills the doorway, where a father used to stand. Aurelio had known that, had counted on it. Had Lazaro now saw with a terrible backward clarity, selected him for exactly that softness. The way a man chooses the lock he already holds the key to. Coralie was watching him from the floor. "What it is," she said. "You have gone somewhere with your face. I have just found out that the wedding I was going to cancel out of decency," he said. "I now have to cancel out of survival. It seems I was never a groom. I was a door." He stood.
"Get up,"
he said gently. "I am moving the 2 of you somewhere warm tonight. Somewhere with a lock, I trust, and men I trust standing on it, and in the morning, we will talk about the rest." "No," Coralie said. He almost laughed. "Of course no. I am not leaving Petros," she said, rising, her chin coming up. "I am not leaving this block for you to fight over like it is yours to fight over. And I am not being carried off to some tower to be kept safe and quiet while men decide things. I have kept us safe for 3 years, without a single one of you. I did not ask to be rescued, and I am not going to be relocated." Lazaro looked at her for a long moment. Then he did the thing that no one who worked for him would have believed if they had seen it. He sat back down on the crate so that he was lower than she was, and he made his voice quiet and plain, and stripped of every ounce of the authority he had spent a life building. "You are right," he said, "so tell me what you will allow. Because I am not asking to own you, Coralie. I am asking how to keep a 9-year-old boy breathing through what is coming, and I would genuinely rather do it your way. Because your way has kept him alive for 3 years, and my way has, until about an hour ago, been part of what was killing him. I have spent an entire life deciding things for people who were not in the room. I would like, just once, to do the opposite, and I would like to start with the 2 people it would cost me the most to get wrong." It stopped her cold. She had armored herself against every version of him, except that one. "Petros comes too," she said at last. "And the men you trust stand outside a place I choose, not a place you choose. To him, we are having an adventure. That is the deal." "Done," Lazaro said. "Every word of it." Then his phone buzzed against the crate, and the name on it was Aurelio, and the timing of it was so precise that Lazaro understood the old man had a pair of eyes somewhere close, watching to see where the missing groom had gone to ground. He let it ring twice. He arranged his voice into the warm, tired, dutiful thing Aurelio expected to hear. Then he answered, "Nephew," Aurelio said. "All honey. Half the city is looking for you. Your bride is in tears, her father is in a temper. Where have you been?" "Handling something small," Lazaro said. "It got large. Come to the house at the end of the week, and I will explain all of it. Bring your appetite. We will settle everything at last." He ended the call before the old man could hear anything underneath the words and set the phone down, and found Coralie staring at him. "You are going to smile at a man while you take him apart," she said. It was not quite a question. "Yes," Lazaro said. "Does that frighten you?" "No," she said, and there was something new and careful in the way she said it. "It is the first time tonight you have looked like a man I would trust to stand in front of Bram." He put them in a shuttered wine importer's flat above one of his own clean businesses, 4 streets from the Starling, a warm high room with one door and no sight lines, and he set 4 men on it, whose loyalty he had personally bought and tested over 11 years. Petros arrived, confused and grumbling, in a coat too big for him, and fell asleep in a chair within the hour. Bram, told they were guests of a friend with a very good kitchen, ate 2 bowls of pasta and slept the deep, untroubled sleep of a child whose sister has finally, visibly, stopped bracing. Coralie did not sleep. Neither did Lazaro. They sat at a marble counter with the real ledger open between them, and the whole ugly machine of it laid out under a lamp, and they took it apart together, and that was its own kind of intimacy. The 2 of them bent over the thing that wanted them dead. He had done this work 100 times with hard men in back rooms, and it had always been a transaction. This was not that. She would go quiet over a column, and he learned to wait. Because, at the end of the quiet, she always surfaced, holding something he had walked straight past. She was quicker than he expected, faster than most of his own people. She had spent 3 years reading men who came to collect, and she read the ledger the same way, for what it was really saying under what it said. "These dates," she said, tapping a column, "these are not payment dates. Look, they cluster. Every other Friday, then nothing, then a burst. That is not money moving. That is work being scheduled." Lazaro leaned in. "What kind of work?" "Clearings," she said, and her voice had gone flat and certain. "I have watched it happen up and down this block for a year. First, the envelopes go up more each month until the holdout cannot pay. Then the utilities start to fail. A gas smell that comes and goes. A wiring fault the landlord will not fix. And then, always, there is an accident. A fire that started in the walls. A leak that nobody caught. The building empties, the insurance pays, the lot sells clean, and everyone agrees it was a shame about the old wiring. I have seen it 4 times. I have smelled the gas myself and told myself I imagined it, because the alternative was knowing. There was a woman named Delia who ran the laundromat 2 doors down. She said, her eyes on the ledger and somewhere else entirely. She would not sign either. She used to give Bram his quarters for the dryer for free, and pretend she had miscounted. One morning in February, the whole block woke to fire trucks, and the laundromat was a black shell, and they said it was the dryer's faulty dryers. Everyone nodded, because it is always the dryers or the wiring or the old gas line. Delia went to stay with a cousin upstate and never came back, and the lot sold in the spring. I brought her a plant the day it happened, a little fern. I remember thinking, at least she got out. I did not let myself think the other thought. I have gotten very good at not thinking. The other thought, it is a whole muscle. You would not believe how strong I have made it. Lazaro thought of the laundromat, a black shell he had driven past without turning his head, and of a fern, and of a woman named Delia who had given a sick boy his quarters for nothing. He understood that he had spent his adult life on the paying side of a great many ferns. "What is her cousin's town?" he said. Coralie looked up, startled. "Why?" "Because when this is finished," he said, "Delia is going to get her laundromat back, or a better one, on a clean lot, with her name on the paper, It will not undo February. But it is going to happen. And it is going to happen because you carried her name in your mouth like a stone, for a year, so that someone would still be able to say it. She stared at him, and did not say no. For a moment she seemed unable to say anything at all. Lazaro went very still. He turned back to the ledger, and found the starling's line, the last unshaded box in a long row of shaded ones, and beside it, in Aurelio's careful hand, a single notation and a date. The date was tomorrow. He read it twice, to be sure, the cold, reading it correctly. The last holdout on the block, the stubborn old man who would not sign, and the girl above the diner who kept him from signing. Aurelio did not need them to sign anymore. He needed them gone, and the ground clean, and the sale closed before the wedding collapsed and took his reward down with it. An accident, old wiring, a gas smell that came and went. A fire in the walls of a building with a child asleep on the top floor. He would burn it, Lazaro said aloud, and the words sounded strange in his own mouth. Tomorrow night. He is going to burn the starling with you in it, and call it the wiring. And the last thing, standing between his money and the fire, is one old man and one waitress, and he has already decided you do not count. Coralie had gone white, but she did not flinch, and she did not weep, and Lazaro watched her put the terror where she always put it, somewhere behind her sternum, folded small, out of the boy's sight. When, she said, I need the time, because if you tell me the time I can tell you who does it. The note says the small hours, he said, after the last bus, before the first light. Then, it is the same crew, she said immediately. There is a pattern to the accidents. They always happen in the gap between the night patrol and the dawn one, and they always come in a utility van, gas company, or electric, so that a man in a fluorescent vest, carrying a can into a building at 3 in the morning, is invisible, because no one has ever once been afraid of the gas man. That is how they walk into a locked building. They knock. They say there is a leak on the block. They are so sorry to wake you, and people open the door because you always open the door for the gas man. Lazaro looked at her, at the terrible completeness of what a person learns when the world has taught them that safety is a thing other people have. You have been studying how they would come for you, he said, for a year, without ever letting yourself say the word out loud. I have been studying everything, she said. It is the only thing I own. Most people spend what they learn, he said. You saved yours. He looked down at the column of scheduled deaths written out in his own house's careful hand. I have been rich my whole life and never once learned to read this. You have been poor your whole life, and you cannot stop reading it. I am beginning to suspect I had the worse end of the bargain. He stood and walked to the dark window and looked out at the 4 streets between here and the diner, and he did the cold arithmetic that had run under his whole life, except that for the first time the numbers were people he could not afford to lose. Aurelio would come in the small hours in a utility van with a hired crew and a can, expecting a sleeping old man and a frightened girl. He would not be expecting the door to open on Lazaro Belandi. He believed he had until the end of the week. He believed the fire was a last piece of quiet housekeeping to be finished before the two of them sat down to divide what remained. And he did not know that the book was already open on a marble counter 4 streets away, and that the boy he had raised into a useful tool had finally, too late for him, learned to read it. Ivo, he said. The man rose from the corner where he had been pretending not to listen. Tomorrow the gas man comes to the Starling. We are going to be inside it when he knocks. Quiet crew, ours only. Nobody who has said good morning to Aurelio in the last month, because I do not yet know how many of my own house he has bought. 2 men on the roof across the street. 2 in the storeroom, 2 in the stairwell, and me at the door. Because it is my face that will stop his heart for the half-second we need. Nobody moves until the can is inside the building and his hand is on it. I want it past any doubt, so that no man who works for me ever has to lie awake wondering whether I was sure. He turned. And Ivo? If it goes wrong, if there are more of them than the book promises. The only thing that matters, the only thing, is that nothing burns and no one 4 streets from here ever hears a raised voice about it. She has spent 3 years keeping that boy from being afraid. We are not going to be the reason he learns how. Ivo nodded once and went to make the calls. Coralie came to stand beside him at the window. You are going to be in the building, she said. Yes. She was quiet a moment. Then she said the thing that cost her the most of anything she had said all night. And she said it looking at the glass and not at him, because some true things can only be said sideways. If you get yourself killed in my diner, she said, saving my brother, I will never forgive you. Do you understand me? Not ever. You do not get to become one more person I have to be sad about. That is not on the table. That was never on the table. It was not a yes. He knew better than to hear it as a yes. But it was the first time she had ever asked him for anything at all, even in the shape of a threat, and Lazzaro Bellondi stood at a dark window, 4 streets from a fire that had not happened yet, and understood that he would burn down a great deal more than a marriage to make sure it never did. He did not sleep that day. He spent it the way a careful man spends the hours before violence, walking the ground, setting his people, learning the diner's bones the way he had never bothered to learn anything in the flats before. The loose board, the back stair, the storeroom with the one high window. By nightfall, the Starling was dark and cold, and looked exactly as abandoned as it needed to look, and every shadow in it that mattered had one of his men folded into it. He had learned the building the way you learn a face you intend to keep, the loose 4th board on the back stair that announced a footstep. The storeroom window, too high to climb but wide enough to pass a child through, if it ever came to that, the 2 exits, and the third that did not show from the street because Aurelio's people had never once had reason to look for it. He had never in his life paid this kind of attention to anything in the flats. It shamed him a little how much there turned out to be worth loving in a thing once you decided to stop looking away from it. He went back to the warm flat one last time before it started. Bram was awake, propped on pillows, a stack of comic books beside him and color back in his face that had not been there the night before. He looked at Lazzaro with the frank assessing stare that still knocked something loose in the man every time. Cora says we might go home tomorrow, Bram said. Is that true? If everything goes the way I intend, Lazzaro said, you will go home tomorrow, and the men who used to come on Fridays are never going to come again. That part I can promise you. Are you going home too? Lazzaro did not have an answer to that. He had not had a home in the sense the boy meant it since he was younger than Bram. He is a very direct child, he said to Coralie, who had come to lean in the doorway with her arms crossed hard over herself. He gets it from our mother, she said. Bram, teeth. Go. When the boy had gone, she stood in the doorway and did not uncross her arms, and Lazzaro saw that she had wound herself so tight she was nearly humming with it. I know that look, he said gently. I have worn it. Say the thing. I do not get to lose anyone else, she said, low and fierce and shaking. That is my whole life, that one rule. I built everything around it. And now there is a man about to walk into my diner to fight for us, and I have gone and let him matter, which was the single most stupid thing I could possibly have done. And if you die tonight, Lazzaro, you will have made a liar out of the only promise I have ever kept. So do not, whatever else you do, do not. He crossed the small room and stopped an arm's length from her, keeping the space clean between them the way he always had, because to close it uninvited would have made everything he had done a lie. I have been shot at by better men than a gas company van full of Aurelio's leftovers, he said. I am very hard to kill, Coralie. I have made it my life's work. He let a breath go. But I will make you a real promise, since you have finally let me stand close enough to make one. I am going to come back through that door tonight, and then, for once, you are going to be the one who decides what happens next. Not Rourke, not the wiring. You She looked at him, and for one suspended second, the armor was all the way down, and there was just a tired, brave woman deciding whether she was allowed to want a thing. Then Ivo's tread was on the stair, and it was time. "Go," she said, and stepped back to let him pass, and did not say the word she always said, and they both noticed that she did not. The van came at 3:30, exactly as the ledger had promised, rolling slow and dark down Halsey Street, with a gas company logo on its side and its headlights off. It parked across the curb in front of the Starling, in the same spot the black car had parked 2 nights before, and for a moment nothing moved but the fine rain in the streetlight. Lazzaro watched from inside the dark diner through the gap in the plywood, his breath slow, his pulse slower, the old cold settling over him like a coat he had worn all his life and pretended these last few years to have outgrown. He was not pretending now. 4 streets away, a boy was asleep, with color in his face. In the dark, all around this room, 6 of his men waited, without seeming to breathe. He let all of it go quiet in him, the fear and the fury both, until there was nothing left but the door, and the men coming to it, and the single thing he had come here to make certain of. Then 4 men got out. They wore the fluorescent vests and carried the flat cases, and one of them swung a red can from his hand with the easy boredom of a man who had done this 4 times before and had never once had a night go wrong. And behind them, unhurried, in a good wool coat with his silver hair neat under the drizzle, came Aurelio, who had not carried a can himself in 30 years, but had apparently decided that a job this delicate, this close to the end, was worth watching, finished with his own eyes. He came to the diner door and he knocked. Gently, courteously, the gas man's knock, and he called out in his warm old voice that there was a leak on the block and he was so terribly sorry to wake anyone. The door opened. Lazzaro stood in it. For the length of one breath Aurelio's face did a thing Lazzaro would keep for the rest of his life. The honey and the warmth and the 30 years of Sunday dinners all sliding off it at once, leaving underneath the plain calculating cold that had been there the whole time, that had been there at the graveside. That had probably been there at the christening. "Nephew," Aurelio said. His voice barely changed. That was the horror of him. "What are you doing in this filthy little place?" "Learning to read," Lazzaro said. "It turns out I never really knew how." He stepped out under the rain and let the door swing wide behind him, and from the dark of the diner and the dark of the stairwell and the dark above the storefronts across the street, his own men rose up quiet and certain. And the 4 in the vests understood all at once that they had walked a can of gasoline into the one building in the city where it would do them no good at all. It was very fast, and it was not loud, because Lazzaro had chosen men who did their work the way a surgeon does, without flourish and without noise. The one with the can never got it open. The 2 with the flat cases set them down when they understood that setting them down was the only future on offer. The 4th reached for something under his vest, and Ivo was simply there, close and quiet, and took the reaching out of him with an efficiency that was almost gentle. 10 seconds, perhaps. When it was finished, the 4 hired hands were face down and bound on the wet pavement, all of them breathing, none of them worth the trouble of anything worse, and the red can was rolling loose in the gutter, filling slowly with rainwater, and Aurelio stood alone in the ring of Lazzaro's men, with his neat silver hair coming loose across his forehead, and his manicured hands beginning at last to shake. "Lazzaro," the old man said, and now the warmth came flooding back into his voice, the way it always had, the tool he had used on a fatherless boy for 20 years. "Lazzaro, listen to me. Whatever that book told you, it does not tell you the pressure I was under. Rourke would have taken everything. I was protecting the family. I was protecting you. Everything I did, so that when the dust settled there would still be a Bellondi left standing, and it was always going to be you. I swear it on your father. It was always going to be you. You knelt at his grave." Lazzaro said. "You put your hand on the stone. I stood right beside you. I was 19. I thought I was watching a man grieve. He tilted his head. Tell me, was it already arranged that day? Had you already met with Rourke? Be careful. I have the calendar. I will know. Aurelio's mouth opened, and the lie rose in it out of pure ancient habit. And then it died, because he saw in Lazzaro's face that there was no version of the next sentence that bought him anything. The silence he left was its own confession. For a moment, Lazzaro let himself feel the whole 20 years of it. The loaded weapon placed in a boy's hands, the patient voice teaching him to breathe and squeeze. All of it revealed now for what it had always been. A long, slow cultivation, a man growing a tool in the shape of a son. It should have broken something in him. He waited to feel it break. It did not. That was the last gift his father's oldest friend ever gave him, though neither of them would ever have called it one, the discovery that some betrayals are so total, they come out the far side, into a terrible, clean quiet, where there is nothing left to decide. You are going to put a family out with the fire, Lazzaro said, very quietly, so that none of the others would carry it, so that it would be only his. A sick boy and his sister asleep over that diner, and you were going to burn the roof out from over them, collect the insurance, and eat at my table on Sunday, and pass me the bread. He looked at the old man for a long moment, and whatever was in his face made Aurelio, who had not been afraid of anything in 30 years, take one small step backward into the ring of men who did not move to let him through. I am not going to do to you what you came here to do, Lazzaro said. I am not an animal, whatever my father's oldest friend tried to raise me into. But you are finished. Every man in this city is going to know by noon what you tried to sell, and to whom. You will not have my protection, and without my protection, Aurelio, you have nothing left but the people you betrayed me to, and they do not forgive failure the way I do. He nodded to Ivo. Put him in his own van. Drive it to Rourke's hotel, and leave it at the door, with the doors unlocked and the gas can on the seat, so that Desmond understands, without a single word passing between us, exactly how tonight went, and exactly who it went badly for. Aurelio was still saying his name, still reaching for the old warm register that had always worked on the boy, when they closed the van doors on it and the sound cut off. The street was very quiet after that. One of the bound men wept into the wet asphalt, more from terror than from hurt, and Lazzaro crouched and told him, not unkindly, that he would live, that he would be driven to the edge of the city and let go, and that he might use the rest of the life he was being handed to take up a gentler trade. The man nodded and nodded. They always nodded. Lazzaro stood alone in the rain on Halsey Street a moment longer. The Starling loomed dark and unburned behind him, its windows whole. The boy, safe 4 streets away, no fire in the walls, no accident in the morning paper. He found he was not cold at all. After a night's work like this one, he had always felt the same gray nothing he had assumed for years was simply the shape of his soul. He felt something else, now plainer and much larger. He had kept a promise. He had said a thing would not happen, and then he had made the whole world agree with him, not for money and not for territory, but because a boy needed to wake up in the morning, and now the boy was going to. He turned up his collar and went to keep the only other promise that had ever frightened him, the one he had made at a dark window, to come back through the door. She had not slept. He had known she would not. When he came up the stair of the warm flat, wet through and smelling of rain and gun oil and other men's fear, the door opened before he reached it, and Coralie stood in the gap exactly as she had stood in the diner door 2 nights before, except that this time her hands were empty of any weapon at all, and that he understood was the entire point. She had spent 3 years answering every door with something in her fist. She had opened this one with nothing, because she had decided in the hours of waiting whom she was waiting for. He stopped on the threshold, dripping, and did not come in, because coming in uninvited was the one habit he had promised her silence he would break. They stood a single step apart, the width of everything each of them had spent a lifetime protecting, She looked at him whole and standing. And hers. She looked at the dark stain that was not his on his cuff, and the exhaustion in him, and the fact of him alive in the doorway. "It is done," he said. "He will never send anyone again. Neither will Rourke. By morning, though that conversation is still mine to have. Bram is asleep. The starling is standing. There is no fire. There is nothing left on this street that wants either of you gone." She heard it the way she heard everything, all the way to the bottom, testing it for the catch, the hook, the price. 3 years had taught her that good news was only ever the wrapping around a bill. She waited for the bill. It did not come. He simply stood there, wet and finished, and asking for nothing at all, and the not asking was the thing that finally worked loose the last knot in her, the one she had tied at 19 and pulled a little tighter every year since. She did not move, and he thought she would hold the line one more time, because holding the line was the truest thing about her, the thing 3 hard years had welded to her spine. He would not have blamed her. He had braced for one more no, and he had decided on the walk over that he would honor it, that he would set them up somewhere clean and safe and step back out of their lives entirely, if that was the shape of her yes, because a man does not get to save people and then present them with a bill. The silence stretched. Rain ticked on the glass. Down the hall a child breathed easy and even. And Lazaro, who had faced men with guns without his pulse so much as lifting, discovered that he could not entirely feel his own hands, because for the first time since he was a boy, the outcome of a thing that mattered to him was going to be decided by someone other than himself. He had no lever to pull, no ledger to read, no man to send. He could only stand in a doorway wet and emptied out, and let a woman with every reason in the world to close the door decide whether she would. But Coralie did not say no. She crossed the space he had spent every encounter refusing to cross, and she put her hand flat against his chest, over the heart, the way you check that a thing is real, that it is beating, that it came back. She could feel it going hard and quick, under the wet wool. "Do not misunderstand this," she said, and her voice was shaking and furious and soft all at once. "I still do not want your money. I do not want your tower, or your name, or your world, and if you ever try to hand me an envelope I will throw it in the river. This is not me saying yes to any of that." Her fingers curled into his shirt. "This is me saying that I waited at a door for a man for the first time in my life, and it was you, and I hated every second of it, and I would do it again. That is all this is. Do not make it more than that, and do not you dare make it less. I have never in my life wanted anything to be more than exactly what it is," Lazaro said, and lifted his hand, slowly, giving her the whole way to every part of the movement so she could stop it. And when she did not stop it, he laid his hand over hers where it pressed against his heart. "You said no to me a dozen times," he said. "On the sidewalk, at the door, over the doctor, over the tower. And every single time you did it, you were the only honest thing in 100 miles. And I fell a little further, and I could not for the life of me work out why." He looked at her. "I understand it now. It is because a person who cannot be bought is the only person whose yes is worth anything. Everyone in my life has always said yes. You are the first one who ever made me earn a single thing, and it is the only thing I have ever earned that I am proud of." She was quiet a long moment, her hand still fisted in his wet shirt, her forehead close enough now that he could feel the warmth of her breath through the cold cloth. "I am going to be difficult," she warned the front of his shirt. "You should know that going in. I have been the only one in charge of everything for 3 years, and I do not hand that over, not to you, not to anyone. I will argue with you about every single thing. I will say no, so often you will grow sick of the sound of it." "Good," he said, and she could hear that he meant it, which was the most disorienting part of the whole disorienting night. "That is the sound I crossed the city for. I have a house full of people who say yes to me. I came all this way for the one voice that tells me the truth. Keep it, I am asking you to keep it." Neither of them moved, her hand over his heart and his covering hers, the rain ticking on the glass. He did not kiss her. It was not that kind of moment, and they were not yet that kind of two people. It was rarer than that, and harder to counterfeit. A truce between two people who had never once been able to afford one, and were, at last, going to try. Down the short hall a door cracked. A small tousled head leaned out, blinking, having heard voices and decided, in the way of 9-year-olds, that sleep was for people with less pressing business. "Are you back?" Bram said to Lazaro. And then, before anyone could answer, he looked at his sister, at her hand on the stranger's chest, and her face wet and unhidden for once. And a slow, careful understanding moved over his small features. "You are crying," he said, "but you are not hiding it." "No," Coralie said, and laughed, and wiped her face, without letting go of Lazaro's shirt. "No, not this time." "Good," Bram said, with enormous satisfaction, as though a great administrative matter had finally been resolved to his liking. He pointed one stern small finger at Lazaro. "She gets the last word," he said. "Always. That is the rule of the house." Then, his terms stated and plainly accepted, he went back to bed. Morning came gray and clean over the flats, and the starling opened for breakfast as if nothing at all had happened in the small hours, because that was the arrangement Coralie insisted on. Petra stood behind the counter in a fresh apron, baffled and delighted to still have a counter to stand behind. Bram sat in the good booth with an enormous plate of eggs and a comic, breathing easy, the empty inhaler in the trash and a full one in his pocket and 3 more in a drawer at home. And Lazaro stood by the window in yesterday's coat, with a cup of Petros's terrible coffee going cold in his hand, holding a phone to his ear, waiting for a man in a good hotel to finish looking at what had been left at his door. He had not gone home to change, and found he did not want to. The good coat smelled of rain, and the long night, and faintly, of the diner now, and he wore it the way another man might wear a medal. Behind him, the starling filled with its morning regulars, dock men and nurses off the night shift, an old woman reading the same newspaper from the same stool, and not one of them knew the room they ate breakfast in had been marked, in a careful hand in a book in a floor safe, to burn before dawn. Lazaro knew. He meant to be the only one who ever would. When Desmond Rourke's voice came on the line, it had none of the smooth patriarch left in it. It had the sound of a man who had gone downstairs expecting a car, and found instead a message he could not misread. "You went to a great deal of trouble," Desmond said, "to say no to a wedding." "I did not say no to a wedding," Lazaro said. "My people say I am marrying beneath me. That is not why I called. I called to be very clear. Once, so there is no misunderstanding later, and no war. Neither of us wants. The flats are closed to you. Every lease your money touched reverts this week. Your man inside my house is finished, and you will not find another, because I have learned to read my own ledgers now, and I am going to keep doing it. You may take your daughter home to the north with her dignity intact, and I wish her genuinely well, better than either of us wished the other. But if a single utility van with your paper behind it ever comes down Halsey Street again, I will not send you a message next time. I will come myself. Do you understand me, Desmond?" There was a long silence on the line. The silence of a man recalculating a board he had thought he owned down to the last square. When Rourke spoke again, the patriarch was entirely gone from his voice, and what was left was almost human. The bafflement of a man who had never once in his life met a price he could not name. "You are giving all this up," he said. "The money, the reach, the safety of it. For what? A diner, a waitress, a neighborhood you clawed your way out of with your teeth." Lazaro looked at the booth by the window, at the boy with the eggs, and the woman refilling a stranger's coffee with flour still on her forearm, at the whole warm, loud, ordinary room that no one was ever going to burn. For the first thing in 20 years that was not for sale, he said, and hung up, and did not think about Desmond Rourke again. Coralie came and stood beside him at the window, drying her hands on her apron. She did not lean into him, and he did not put his arm around her. Because they were not whatever the neighborhood would eventually decide, that kind of easy, and both of them privately suspected they never entirely would be. What they were was two people who had each spent a lifetime making certain no one could ever get close enough to cost them anything, standing close enough, at last, to cost each other everything, and choosing to stand there anyway. You are going to be underfoot, in my diner, constantly now, aren't you? She said. A man like you, in a place like this, constantly. Lazaro agreed. I am going to tip, catastrophically, and you are going to give it all back, and we are going to do that for approximately the rest of our lives. She almost smiled. Almost. Then she did. I still get to say no to you, she said. About everything, forever. That is the deal, or there is no deal. That, Lazaro said, is the only reason I am here. Outside the window, the gray was burning off the rooftops. In the good booth, Bram waved a forkful of egg at them, through the glass, imperious summoning. Upstairs in the little room over the diner, the space heater that had sat unplugged and coiled through 3 winters of saved electricity was gone. Thrown out that morning on Lazaro's quiet instruction and replaced by heat that simply worked, that a child could turn up without doing sums first, and of everything that had happened in 3 days, it was that. The ordinary miracle of a warm room that had made Coralie turn her face away so he would not see it. She had spent 3 years unable to afford warmth. She was going to have to learn, slowly and against every instinct she owned, how to let herself be warm. And that is the whole of it. A man who had spent his life certain that everyone, given the right pressure, would eventually say yes, and the one woman who never once did, and who thereby became the single thing in all his cold and ordered world that he could not buy, could not own, and could not in the end live without. He did not take her over. He did not carry her off. He simply stopped being the kind of man a woman like that would have been right to refuse, and then he waited, in the doorway, in the rain, for as long as it took, until the strongest no he had ever heard turned, on its own terms and in its own time, into the only yes he had ever earned. He had come to the flats chasing the novelty of a woman who would not take his money. He had stayed because she showed him, without ever once meaning to, that a man is not the sum of what he can take. A man is what he refuses to burn. He set the cold coffee down on the counter and went to fold his expensive frame into the cracked vinyl of the booth across from the boy, as though he had been doing it his whole life. And Coralie watched the most dangerous man she had ever met ask her little brother, with total seriousness, which of the comic heroes, and settle in to argue the point, as if nothing in the world mattered more. This is going to be my life now, she thought. This ridiculous, impossible, unbought thing. She picked up the coffee pot to hide her face and went to work. She had told him no more times than anyone living had ever dared, and that in the end was the only reason she was ever going to be his. If this one got its hooks in you, do me a small favor. Leave a like, so the machine carries it to the next person who needs to hear that the quiet ones hold all the power. Subscribe, because there's always another slow burn coming where the person everyone underestimated turns out to run the whole board. And tell me down in the comments which of Coralie's refusals was your favorite, because I have mine, and I badly want to know if we chose the same one. Look after the people who keep watch at your door. I will see you in the next story.